Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is actually the last class of the series. So what I want to do is wrap things up, talk about something new, but also sort of wrap things up and hopefully tie it all together in some way. So tonight, what I decided to do was talk about Moshe. And the reason I chose to talk about Moshe is because I do want to talk about him, but I'm not going to talk about him like him so directly about him. We're going to talk about things that happened to him and things that he did, but I want to talk also more about, importantly, the things that he said in Sefer Devarim. And, with Sefer Devarim, I highly recommend learning in depth. But Sefer Devarim is Moshe's final words to the nation. And if you really want to feel and understand the connection of Am Yisrael to the land of Israel, then really Devarim, I think personally, is the most obvious way to see that in the Tanakh. So we're going to be referencing things from that, things from Moshe's life, and seeing how this all ties together. So when we started this whole series in the beginning of the summer, we talked, the first class we spoke about was the connection in general of humans, of us to the land, and the Adam to the Adamah, and how we have this intrinsic connection to land and our physical side. And now what I want to do is hopefully through the other classes that we went through, whoever heard all of them, if not, you can listen to them, but either way, now sort of come full circle to what is so special about Eretz Yisrael. How do we go from this general feeling or idea that we are humans, we are connected to the land, we have to work the land, and land is so important to us, to this specific land of Eretz Yisrael and not just anywhere. And being that land as a land of Brit, a land of covenant with God, and how we all see this. And like I said, I think there's no other way to do that without referencing things that happened to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, I think most everyone obviously knows who Moshe Rabbeinu is. We know him all for the Pesach story. We know him from a big portion of the Torah and the Parashat Shavua. And so I'm not going to go necessarily so deep into him, like what his background is, but I want to just point out a few interesting things about him that may not be necessarily so in the front of your mind. So interesting points was that he was a prince of Egypt and a prince of Midian for a large portion of his life. So he spent a large portion of his life before he was the leader of the Jewish people. He was living as a leader and a royal in the Egyptian royalty, the Egyptian court, right? He was raised by the daughter of Paro. He lived in that whole lifestyle. He then goes to marries the daughter of a Midianite, it says Kohen Midian, a priest of Midian, which means some sort of royalty or some sort of a higher status. And then he was a high status person in Midian. And this is all pre being the leader of Bnei Israel. So it's just an interesting thing to know is that he lived a lot of his life disassociated from the nation, yet he was always connected. If you look at the stories of his life, even before he was the leader, obviously after as well, but even before he was, the things we know about him before also show he was always tied to tzedek u'mishpat, justice and righteousness, which is something that we see also with the Avot, and he was always connected in that way, whether or not he was physically actually with the nation or not. So one of the ways I see him as a leader. And being worthy, not that I should say he's worthy, but being one of the reasons God chose him to be worthy of the job of leading the nation from Egypt, Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. Now, Moshe is also very interesting in a lot of ways, but another interesting thing about Moshe is his whole character, his whole development, his whole mission is that of parent to the nation. His mission is to help the nation achieve their potential, and through him helping the nation achieve their potential, he essentially will achieve his own potential. And like I said before, it's a very parent-child dynamic. That as a parent, yes, we have our own missions, but a lot of our missions and our goals in our life have to do with our children. So Moshe's goals is basically a simple one, but he basically takes the nation from birth to adulthood in a sense, because he's taking them, a slave nation, into the desert to develop and be ready for going into the land. So and it's a very interesting thing because you don't really think of it like this, but the nation it's the whole Yetziat Mitzrayim is the birth of a nation, because yes, they are a nation in Mitzrayim, but they're more of a social group, not necessarily a religious group or they're more of just that's their structure. But then they make this brit with God and they follow in with God, and they're able to really come to their own from a nation of slaves to a nation of free people with this brit with God. So what I want to do is, and Moshe himself says, actually, I'll go back in a minute. So basically what's happening, if you look at the whole story in Sefer Bamidbar, I'm not going to go into all the details, but the nation is constantly complaining, constantly getting on Moshe's case, causing him problems. Why is this so bad? Why are we living this way? And it's almost like, a toddler, I have 2 toddlers. I'm a teacher for elementary school. I was a psych major, so like early childhood development is like something I'm very interested in. My sister-in-law actually was with them on Shabbat, and she saw me reading a book. She's like, "You're always reading a child development book," but I said I try. So I think when you look at it in that perspective, you see the whole Sefer Bamidbar as Moshe teaching them to mature, to grow up. And essentially what's happening is all these little tantrums. What's a tantrum? It's they're establishing their boundaries. They're establishing, what can I do? What is my place in this world? How far can I go? Testing the limits. And us as the adults, or Moshe as the leader and God are teaching them where to draw those boundaries and to develop as a nation. And so this whole journey in the Midbar is essentially Moshe helping the people realize and understand what it means to be an adult and a grown-up nation. And it's hard, right? It's hard to be a parent. It's hard to lead a nation, obviously. And Moshe himself, even though he was, spoke to God panim el panim, and he was a navi kol adam, and he's a level that none of us could really get to. I mean, we hope to, but it's not very common that people are like him. He too was human on some, and even though a very high form of human, but he was human. And he says to God at one point, here I'll bring up Psukim. He says to God, where's my slide? There it is. He says to God, at one point when they're complaining so much, the nation, they're complaining for meat. And he tells God, and just the language, just pay attention. Hold on one second. Let me make it bigger. If you notice the language, again, to this whole child-parent relationship. So he says, so basically, I didn't bring the whole pre-story, but they're crying, they're complaining, this is horrible. And Moshe's hearing them complaining and crying, and God gets angry, and Moshe, gets, sees that it's bad. And Moshe tells God, "V'amen Moshe el Adonai, lama hareote la'avadecha ulama lo matzati chen b'necha la'asum et masa kol ha'am hazeh alai." He's like, "What did I do? What did I do to you, basically? Like, what, did you not like me? Why did you give me this challenge of this nation, of this whole burden of this nation, right? Like, what did I deserve to get this, basically?" Hariti et kol ha'am hazeh. And listen to this language. Anochi hariti et kol ha'am hazeh. Did I carry this nation in my womb? Like, was I pregnant with this nation? Did I birth this nation? So you tell me that I should carry him like a nursing mother carries their baby. So he basically is saying, what I'm doing now is basically holding them like an infant in my chest, like a nursing baby, carrying them to this land that you promised their fathers. And then he says they're complaining for meat. So he says, how do you expect me to give them this? I can't do this by myself. It's too much for me. Listen how strong he is. He's so distraught at this point. He's so like, I can't do anymore. I don't know what else to do, right? He's He's like, at this point, just kill me. I don't know what else to do. He literally, that's what he's saying. And again, if you notice the imagery of the pregnancy, of the nursing mother, of the birth, he realizes that this is his mission, that he's really carrying them from infancy to mature, to adulthood. Now, I didn't bring the response of God, but the response of God is that he tells Moshe to get 70 zekenim, to get 70 leaders, and he tells Moshe, you're right, basically. I mean, he doesn't say you're right, but he tells by his answer, he's saying, you set up a support system. You set up these 70 zekenim. I'm going to help the people that will be leaders under you that can help you deal with the nation. And it's showing that I think is that we're not meant to go on this journey alone. As individuals and as a nation, we're not meant to and we're not expected to go on this journey alone. We're meant to do it with God and with each other as a nation. And I think that Moshe realizes this in the Midbar, and God seconds his realization and agrees with him and gives him the support that he needs. And I think that that's something that we have to do in our own life with our parents, with our children, with our friends, with the relationships we have, is know when we need to ask for support and know when we need to have someone facilitate certain things and delegate certain things and really not look at that as a form of weakness, but look at that as a form of reality, and that we don't expect, we're not God, right? We're not gods, so we can't do it all. And I think that goes back to also Adam Harishon, and that was his feeling. He wanted to almost be a god, right? And also Midab Bavel, they wanted to fight with God and make their own names. And Moshe is basically saying, he knows he can't do it. And this, I think this dialogue is really the humanity, the us being able to really see the raw humanity of Moshe shows us how close to God he was, because he was so available and willing to say, I can't do it, I need God, or I need some support, which he gets from God. So I think that that's just something so beautiful about the character of Moshe, is that we look at him as this ideal human, which he was and is, but at the same time, what makes him the ideal human is that he's able to see this and recognize and embrace his humanity in a way that needs to be so intertwined with God and not look at himself as a God, because we can't sustain that, right? We want it, if you want it, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but if you want to try to control everything and think that you rule the world, you fall very quickly and you realize that's not the case, So this is, I think, a very important aspect of his character, and also of the way he ruled the nation and the way he was taking them to the land. Now we see, I want to bring in two things. So Moshe, there's two instances in the story in Moshe's life that are very similar, but are very different. And what happens is they both start the same way. There's no water, and the nation is crying for water. And they both start that way. And what's interesting is one of the stories is at the beginning of the Midbar journey, when very close to when they left Mitzrayim, almost immediately after, very soon after. And the second one is 40 years later, almost very, very close to when they were going into the land. And you have to realize when I say that, we have to realize, not you, but we have to realize that those are completely different people, because in those 40 years, everyone who was there at the first instant, even though to us as readers, we're like, oh, this happened already, to those people, it didn't happen already because they all died, right? The 40 years they were in the desert because of Chet HaMeraglim, everyone was dying. So towards the end, that last year, those end years, it was all new people, basically. Not basically, it was all new people. So they didn't experience this same situation. Like I'm saying, oh yeah, they both had a situation where they didn't have water and they were complaining and they didn't know what to do. But these are two completely different groups of people. And again, back to, well, I'll say that in a second. So what happens? This story here is the first instance, and it's talking. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to click that. What happened? No. Here, okay. ויסע כל עדה בני ישראל במדבר סין למסעיהם על פי השם ויחנו ברפידים ואין מים לשתות העם. So they get to the Refidim and there's no water. By the way, I was thinking to go on a whole just something to notice. It says למסעיהם על פי השם. If you look in Devarim, whenever they move, whenever they're traveling, not in Devarim, במדבר, sorry, when they're traveling in the desert, it always says al pi Hashem. They traveled al pi Hashem. And I'm not going to go into that now, but just notice that it's all their movement, all their travels to get to the land is al pi Hashem, is it from God's words and direction. So they get to the Fidim and there's no water. And they said, Moshe, give us water. Like, what do you want for me to do? שם המים, וילן העם על משה, ויאמר למה זה עליתנו ממצרים, להמית אותי ואת בניי ואת מקני בשמה. So they're saying, why did you take me out of Mitzrayim so that we should all die here from thirst? We're going to die. Like, what was the purpose of taking us out if we're just going to die now? So Moshe, I'm not going to Moshe, Moshe al Hashem, l'mod ma'aseh la'am hazeh, o uskaluni. That, what should I do? They're going to kill me. They're going to stone me. And Hashem says, ויאמר השם אל משה, אבוא לפניו העם, וקח אתך מזקני ישראל ומטה אשר הכית בו את היאות, קח בידך והלכת, הנה עומד לפניך שם על סור וחורב, והכית בצור, ויצאו ממנו מים, ושתה העם, ויעשו כמשה לנזקני ישראל. So he says, take your stick that you hit the Nile with, right, to split the Nile, and there's a rock there, hit the rock, and water will come out of the rock. And he does it, and it happens. ויקרא שם המקום מסע מריבה, and they called this place מסע מריבה, על ריב בני ישראל, because of the fight, ואנסותם את השם לאמור, היש השם בקרבנו עם עין. And they called this Refidim because they were questioning, was God really with us or not? And by the way, just another interesting point, right after this, Amalek comes and fights with them, and then we have the whole war, which we talked about last week with Yoshua. Just to put in context. So what's happening here? You have a new nation that's just come out of Mitzrayim. They are faced with one of the first challenges, and they complain to Moshe, and they complain in a way that's, it's so interesting, because they're saying, why did you take us out of Mitzrayim? Better was we should die here. They were slaves in Mitzrayim. It wasn't like their life was so great in Mitzrayim, but they're just they don't know what to do, and they're so new to all this independence, and how do I handle myself, right? It's almost like the first time when you give a teenager a car, or, to go do something, they won't know what to do with them. So where do I go? What do I do? Like sometimes it gets too overwhelming. The freedom gets too overwhelming. So I think in a way this is what was happening here. And Moshe and God tells them, don't worry about it, Moshe. It's fine. You'll hit the rock. You'll get water. God makes a miracle. Everyone's fine. Now we get to later in the journey, the second instance. When they get to Midbar Sin, בחודש הראשון, וישב העם בקדש, ותמות שם מרים, ותקבל שם, ולא היה מים לעדה. They don't have water. By the way, interesting why it says Miriam died, because Miriam had, there was a well of water that was from the Zechut of Miriam, that was with by like a nest, that was Zechut Miriam, and when she died, they didn't have water anymore. ולא היה מים לעדה, ויקלו על משה ועל אהרון, and now Moshe and Aaron, by the way, you see, even the leaders of the generation are at the end of the 40 years, they're going to start dying, because Miriam dies, and then a little while later Aaron dies, and then obviously Moshe is going to die as well right before. So now the nation comes to Moshe and Aaron, וירב העם עם משה, ויאמרו למר, בלוגה ותנו בגבת אחינו לפני אדוני, למה הבאת את קהל אדוני אל המדבר הזה למות, שם אנחנו בעירנו. Again, it sounds similar, but let's see how it's not. What do they say? Why did you bring us to the desert to die? ולמה עליתנו ממצרים להביא אותנו אל המקום הרע הזה? לא מקום זרע ותאנה וגפן ורימון ומים עין לשתות. So what do they say? Why did you take us out of Mitzrayim to bring us to this bad place, to the Midbar? We want to go to a place of Zera, Te'ena, Gefen, Rimon, and we want to go to, what are they referencing here? The Te'ena, Gefen, Rimon, the Shirat HaMinim. They're saying, why are we here in the Midbar? We want to be in Eretz Yisrael, right? So that's what they're saying essentially. But Moshe is still hearing the nation of 40 years of, why do you take us out of Mitzrayim? This nation, these people are already a mature people, and they're already saying, we're ready to go to why are we suffering here? We want to be in Israel. The other nation was a nation of immaturity that was saying, we're not ready for freedom. We want to go back, but we don't know how to handle this. So it's actually, in a sense, polar opposite, because the first nation didn't know how to handle the freedom, and this nation is not knowing how to handle not being free and not having the land, and Moshe is still in a little bit in the back on the other nation side. And what happened? So by the Hashem and Moshe lemor, kachat hamateh, va'akel ta'eda, ata ve'aron achicha v'dibarta el hasela. He says, this time, talk to the rock, okay? Not hit it, talk. And I'm going to give you water. V'natati lahem mayim min hasela. But what does Moshe do? V'ikach hamateh v'chanav Hashem kasher tzivav v'iklu Moshe ve'Aaron el hakal epnei hasela v'yemel lehem shmuna hamorim. He calls them rebels. Moshe is very angry with them. And Amir Azela to say lachem mayim, vayireh Moshe et yado, vayachet hasela, v'mateo pamayim, vayitzu mayim. So he gets very angry, he hits the rock twice, and water does come out. But what happened? Vayomer Hashem al Moshe ve'el Aharon, ya'an lo haimantem bi laktisheni, le'nei bnei Yisrael, lachen lo tavo et hakahal hazeh, el haaretz asher natati lahem. Because you didn't do what I asked and do a kiddush Hashem of talking to the rock and making the miracle out of talking to the rock, and the water coming out, you hit it, therefore you're punished and you're not going to be able to come to the nation and to the land. And this is why Moshe does not enter the land. And this is called Mei Meriba, Sheravu b'nei Yisrael Hashem v'yikadesh b'am. So what's happening here is we see that Moshe still looks at the nation as an immature nation, and another thing that I think Rambam says it, Rambam or Ramban, I'm blanking on which one, but the nation saw Moshe as, however Moshe was feeling, because he was so close, Panim El Hashem, the nation thought that if Moshe is happy, that means God's happy with them. If Moshe is happy with what they're doing, God's happy with them. If Moshe is angry with them, that means God's angry with them. And in this case, God was not angry, because at this point they lost their water source, which was Midian, and which was Midian's well, and they're genuinely saying, "I want water. What are we doing here in Midbar? I want to go to Israel already." That's sort of what they're saying, and Moshe is not hearing it, and he's being angry, looking at them still as that immature nation, and God's saying that's not the case, and therefore you can't go into Eretz Israel. And this punishment, and I think this is something that we need to learn for our own lives, is yes, it is very, very hard for people to change. But when they do the self-work and change, we as the people in their life have to acknowledge that and not treat them the way like they are the old them, right? The same way they say, on an extreme case, someone who's a Baal Tshuva, someone who had no connection to Torah mitzvah, and then comes back, you're not allowed to remind them of the things they did, like, oh, before you Baal Tshuva, you did all these sins and you did all these things. And you're not allowed to remind them of that because that's not who they are anymore. They did change and develop themselves. And I think that's really something, especially in your closest relationships, when someone you're very close to, a parent, a child, a sibling, a spouse, that when you're in your certain patterns with them, right? And then they do decide to get up and change and mature or whatever it may be and work on themselves, you shouldn't respond to them, and I'm saying this to myself as well, that in the same way that they were. You should respond to them as their, changed selves, as their mature or whatever challenges they worked on their self. Now, Moshe can't go into the land, and he tells this to the people in Ve'et Hanan. And this Ve'et Hanan, I think to me is one of the saddest. Like, I read this and it's so sad, because you see how desperate Moshe was to enter the land, and how that was his whole life's mission, was to help the nation get there, and also himself. Like, that was his whole purpose, and he's not able to actualize it. And he's telling them, this is in Devarim, right? And he's telling them, Vetchanan el Adonai be'et hahi lemor. Etchanan is like it's to beg, it's to plead. It's like such a desperate tefillah. It's the kind of tefillah, but it's out of desperation. And he says, Adonai Elohim ata lo tilrot et avdecha et gadlecha ve'et yadecha hazaka asher me'el hashamayim ba'aretz asher yaseh k'maseh kavura He praises God. He says, "Who's strong like you that did all these things? Please let me go to cross the Yarden, to Eretz Hatov, to Eretz Israel." Right, God didn't hear me. He didn't hear my prayer. He didn't listen to my prayer. And he says, don't bother asking me again. What could you do? You could go see the land. He tells him to go on a high mountain. He sees the land. And then to put the nail in the coffin, God tells him, God's saying there's no hope for you. You have to go get Yoshua ready to lead the nation. He's going to be the one that's going to go into the land, take the people into the land and finish your mission, essentially. And so what do we see here? Why is this something that Moshe is telling the nation before he goes in? And we see two things. We see that he's reminding the people the same way God had strength and helped them, he's gonna continue to help them, right? Because like he talks about Maasecha Guvrecha, and he wants to see Har HaTov Hazeh ve'Levanon. And the Mefarshim say, what is Har HaTov Hazeh? It's Har HaBayit, Har HaMoriah, the Beit HaMikdash, basically saying he wants to see all this come to fruition. He wants to see a complete and built Eretz Yisrael and a complete and free nation, which is what he was trying to get this whole time in the whole mission. And God doesn't hear it. He said, no, I'm not letting you in. And I think from this we see is that sometimes, no matter how hard we want something and how hard we pray for it and how pure our intentions are and how much we long for it, sometimes certain things are just not in the cards for us. And that's very hard to say and even more hard to live, and certain things that you want so bad that you just don't find a way to get or to achieve. Sometimes it's just the reality and you don't necessarily know why, but that's what God chose for us or didn't choose for us. I think it's also sort of knowing how much Moshe loves the land and how much he longs for it is inspiring us as the nation at the time, but also us as he's sort of saying, like, look to the people and to the people then and to us now. I want to go to this land so badly and I can't do it. But you can. So look how lucky you are and appreciate it and love the land in the same way I do and realize how lucky and blessed you are to be able to go in when I couldn't. And I think that we have, like, it's always crazy to me that, like, when you think about it really, Moshe's whole life was the land and he never got in. And it's just so amazing to me that now you don't really need to do, yes, it's hard to come make Aliyah and come to Israel, but you don't need to do that much now. And Moshe was living his whole life and that was his goal and his purpose. And he wasn't able to do it, which is so, it's really, very hard to read, I think. Hard to really digest that a little bit. I don't know, at least for me. And so then what happens is, I'm jumping around a little bit, but Moshe is basically saying in the whole Sefer Devarim, like I said before, about getting into the land, not losing the land, and how to connect to the land. And he talks about when you get into the land, we have to fight for the land. And he talks about, he says a lot of different things about war with other nations and what it means to have a war with a war as the nation of God. And we touched upon this a little in other classes, but what I want to talk about is he talks about the fact that there's going to be, before war, you're going to have this Kohen come, and he's called the Kohen Mashuach Melchama, the Kohen that's leading them in the war. And he basically makes this proclamation, this announcement, and he says, Shema Yisrael, atem kerevim hayom melchama, im avechem, al yarecha bevecha, al tira'u, ve'al tachbezu, ve'al taharsu mipnechem. You're about to have a war. He's saying, like, when it happened. Don't be afraid. Don't have a heavy heart, and don't get nervous. God's fighting for you. He's saying, and I said this, but when you're fighting as a true nation of Israel with the Brit, God is fighting for you. It doesn't matter what the other nation has. It matters your Brit. And he's giving them that chizuk, that strength. And then he says interesting things. He says certain people that should not come to the war. He says, Mia isha shenata kerem, he didn't get the fruit, he did a vineyard and didn't get the grapes, he shouldn't come. And who Miha Isha, I skipped one. Asher Banabayit, who built a house, but he didn't live there yet and really establish it, he doesn't have to come because he's worried that he's going to die in war. And also someone who betrothed a woman, got engaged, betrothed to a woman, and they didn't get married, he shouldn't come because he's worried about the war, about dying in war. And if anyone has a fear of chet, right, and they're worried that God's not going to be on their side, then don't come as well. And so they're saying these people, because these people have a fear of a few of them have a fear of not finishing through, so they're distracted. They're not going to be worried about really fighting for God and for the land. They're going to be worried about something else. And also they're going to be worried about sin, so they're not, or distracted, so they're not going to be fully fighting. Now, what's interesting is this Rambam brings up and says, he brings in this whole section of Devarim, and then he says, but this is with a Mechemet Reshut. But with Mechemet Mitzvah, well, let me, before I read what happens, a Mechemet Reshut is a war that is fought with, to extend the land and to solidify the borders, right? A war that you don't necessarily need to fight, but it's good to fight. And Mechemet Chovah, a war that you need to fight, is with the 7 nations. You need to capture the land and get into the land with Amalek, or against any enemy that's coming to fight you. A war of necessity, okay? And so Rambam says, Mechemet Mitzvah HaKol Yotzin. Everyone has to go. Afilu chatan mechedro v'kala mechupata. Even a groom out of his wedding room, out of the the cheder yifud, out of just getting married. And what's so important? What's so telling about this is that when it comes to a Mechemet Mitzvah, which is really essentially showing the brit of you and God, and I'm fighting for my land, and I'm establishing this land, and this land is important to me because it's important to you, and it's our land, God, then it's not a choice. You don't have the ability to say, I need to be comfortable, I need to be okay with this. No, you have to go, no matter what. And I think that's something we even see today, is that everyone, has to go to the army. People are exempt, whatever, but most people have to go to the army. And it's such a part of the Israeli culture and the Israeli life and everything about it. And I think we see that today even, because even little things like if you don't go to the army, you don't have connections after, you don't have the certain skills that you need. It's not so simple to get a job even. And you just don't have that right mentality, for better or worse. But we see that even today, the importance of fighting for and establishing the land. And it's interesting. They just started, if anyone, maybe people here are listening, they started a WhatsApp group for Syrians that made Aliyah, Syrians in Israel. And one of the things that people brought up is what is deterring people from making Aliyah? And they were saying about the army and how it's scary. And a bunch of people that had older kids, my kids are still little, no one's in the army yet, but they were saying like, yeah, it's scary, but like this is what we're here for, and it's such a source of pride that your kids are going to fight in the army and fight for the land of Israel, and it's so beautiful in a way, not in a way, it's so beautiful, and that we're able to fight and establish this land that is ours. So I think that's something we still see today about fighting and maintaining our land, and even unfortunately giving up our own lives for it. Now Moshe, so we talked about all this before I go into this second, but we talked about all this and we fight for Eretz Yisrael and we want to go to Eretz Yisrael and we need to get in and everything, all that. But what's so unique about Eretz Yisrael? Why can't we go anywhere else? What's so unique about specifically Eretz Yisrael? And obviously Moshe is the one to tell us this. So what does Moshe say? This is in Devarim, he's telling them before you come to, he's saying what's so different, what's so special. He said, why do I keep clicking that? I'm sorry, I keep clicking the wrong source. Okay. The land that you're about to go enter, it's not like Mitzrayim. That you had a constant supply of water in the Nile River. So what is he saying? Basically, the agriculture of Egypt is based on the Nile River. and the Nile would be constantly flowing, and that's how they would sustain their crops, right? That's why we see with Yosef, the Mitzrayim had food and Canaan didn't. Because why? The land that you're going to is of hills and valleys, and you need the matar hashamayim, the rain, to get the water. So Eretz Yisrael is not relying on a solid water source, which, by the way, in most ancient cultures, you see that all around water sources, because you need water to live. And if you're not around the water source, it's very hard to live. So Moshe is saying this land does not have a solid water source, and you have to rely on the rain. Eretz asher Adonai Alecha doresh ota tamid, and Adonai Alecha ba mereshit hashana v'ad achrit hashana. God's eyes are on this land from the beginning to the end of the year. What does that mean? Because it's reliant on rain, means you're relying on God, right? You're not, I mean, obviously a river, you're also relying on God, but in a less direct way, because the river is just flowing, and the rain, you're really relying on when the rainfall actually will come. So it's saying here is that God is constantly watching the land, meaning he's constantly involved. This is a two-way street of beat. And if you're not, and we see in the Hayam Shamoah, right, in the second paragraph of the Shema, it's very interesting. We say, most of us say this every day, and we don't really necessarily think about it, but it's saying if you listen to, which also this is taken from the Vadim, but we say it every day in Shema. He's saying if you listen to the mitzvot, right, right, to do all the mitzvot and maintain the brit, basically, what you get, you'll get rain. Hooray. Like, it's like a buildup. Like, if you do all this, you get rain. But what does that mean? You'll be able to be tall in the right time, you get the rain, and you'll be able to have your food, your wheat, your tirash, all your produce, and you'll have etzev, and you'll be able to sustain yourself, right? If you don't, then God's not going to give you the rain, and you'll die of famine, and your land will be destroyed. So it's interesting to know is that the general makeup of the land is demanding a connection. It's demanding, God is looking at you, and it's demanding you to look at God. And it's very interesting that even now today, when there's times where the rainfall is not what it should be, the Rabbanut, the rabbis of the country, they established that we say certain tefillot so that we could to pray for rain. Like, they realize it's a connection. And in more ancient times, in the Mishnah and the Gemara, it talks about these ta'aniyot, these fast days that they need to fast and pray and do tshuva to get rain. So what is so important? What is that showing? Is that God is telling us, I'm not just putting you in a nice situation where you could forget about me. No, I want to maintain this relationship. So therefore, it's like if you when you get married, that's not the end of your relationship. Like a lot of people when they're young and they think, oh, I'm gonna get married in the wedding, and they don't think past the wedding day. I mean, that's another whole rant I have of people getting married for the sake of getting married and not actually being in a marriage. But then you wake up and you're like, oh, I actually have to maintain this relationship. I actually have to live with this person and know how to have a positive influence in each other's lives and grow together. And that's work. That's not so simple. It's not a one-night party that you're having, So I think that that's also what God is forcing us to do in a loving way, is saying, I'm forcing you to not just look at the river and get your food and be happy, but no, you have to have this connection with me with rain, and be in constant in tune with me about Brit. And so hold on, I'll just stop that now. So what I want to sort of tie this all together with Moshe and with the land and with everything is that on the one hand, we are very lucky. We're very lucky that now we have Eretz Yisrael and we're able to live here. But at the same time, we shouldn't take it for granted. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's this constant, it is a sacrifice, because yeah, your children are going to the army, your children are fighting for a land that we live in, and it's not so simple, and it is a complex relationship we have with the land, with God, and we have to appreciate and love the land and realize how blessed we are, from, like Moshe says, that he couldn't go, but we are here, and we have to not for 1 second, I'm saying this to myself, but also not 1 second take that for granted, and to appreciate that. And I have to try to, remind myself of that as well. And and being in being in Adam and being connected to the land, and Moshe's final words to us, again, please, I will, if anyone wants to, Devarim is like a must, I think, to really get all these ideas really solidified. But Moshe is saying you can never lose sight of that. You have to realize every single thing is connected to you and the Bri and the land and God. And it started from Adam Harishon, and it was developed with Abraham Avinu, and continued with his children, and we're his children, and we have to still live and maintain that. So I thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the class and the series, and please feel free if you want to contact me. I'd love to do another series if anyone has any ideas, topics they want to talk about, learn about. I hope we all could, live in a fully actualized Yerushalayim like Moshe wanted and like God wants, and that hopefully we all want and could bring to fruition. So thank you.
Thanks, Jan.
Thanks for coming.
Great series. Yep, we enjoyed it.
Thank you.